They said the house burned itself, that no flame touched it first, no hand struck a match. The fire began from within, as though the walls themselves remembered what they had seen and could no longer bear the weight of it. When the sheriff arrived, the roof had already collapsed inward, and through the roaring light, he swore he saw them, two shapes standing side by side, motionless in the inferno, holding hands as if waiting for someone to join them. When the fire died, the basement was still warm. The smell that rose from the ash wasn't just wood. It was something sour, like cooked meat and medicine. And under the collapsed beams, the rescuers found what no one would speak of in public again. 7 tiny coffins carved by hand, lined in white cloth that had never been meant for burial. Inside each, something rested that was almost a child. The townspeople of Crater Lake never rebuilt that property. They fenced it off, left the ground to rot, and swore never to speak the name Oates again. But silence has a strange way of keeping a story alive. Because every winter, when the snow melts and the fog returns to the valley, hunters say they hear crying in the woods. Not the cry of an animal. Not quite human either. Something that sounds like a child trying to remember its name. If you've ever stood in a place where the air feels wrong, where even the trees seem to hold their breath, you've already felt what waits there. And tonight, you'll learn why. Which city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? A place too small for maps, too proud for outsiders. In the early 1900s, its people lived the way their grandparents had, with silence as law, and blood as the only proof of belonging. Outsiders weren't welcome here, not because of hatred, but fear. Fear of what might be seen. Locals said the fog that curled around the lake every autumn wasn't weather. It was memory. It rose from the water like the breath of the drowned, carrying whispers of those who never left. The church bells hadn't rung in 15 years. The last time they did, they rang for 2 coffins that were never opened. The preacher refused to read from the Bible that day. He said the words inside had turned to ash in his hands. The Oates family had lived at the edge of the lake for generations. Their land stretched from the tree line to the water's mouth. Acres of pine, silence, and secrets. They were quiet, devout, and strangely untouched by time. Their children never went to school. Their women gave birth at home. And though there were births often, there were almost never marriages. The town pretended not to notice. The grocer sold them flour without a word. The doctor came only when called after dark. Everyone knew the Oateses had money, old money. The kind that didn't come from land or work, but from inheritance too tangled to trace. Some said they'd been here since before Oregon had a name. Others said they weren't settlers at all, just what was left after everyone else left. By 1903, there were only 2 left who carried the family name, Lydia and Samuel Oates, twins. Beautiful, pale, and uncomfortably identical. They lived in the ancestral house by the lake, where the windows never opened and the curtains never moved. When Samuel went into town for supplies, people watched him, the way you might watch a reflection that doesn't quite move with you. And Lydia, no one had seen her in years, except, perhaps, for the postmaster's son, who swore once that he saw her at dawn, standing in the fog by the water's edge, brushing her hair into the lake as if she were feeding it. The town told itself it didn't care what went on inside that house. But when the first child's bones washed up by the shore, too small to have a name, too malformed to have a future, the silence began to crack. By the spring of 1903, the Oates house was already a legend that no one wanted to believe. The lake had thawed, the ground had softened, and with it came the stench of something that had been buried shallow. Children were told not to wander near the property, though they always did. They'd sneak past the broken gate to dare each other to touch the porch steps. Steps said to sink a little deeper every year, as if the house itself were being swallowed. And though they never saw her face, they sometimes swore they heard a woman's voice humming from the upper window, soft, rhythmic, and wrong. The kind of lullaby that doesn't calm a child but warns them. Inside those walls, Lydia and Samuel lived by rituals older than their names. Every evening, they would eat in silence across a long oak table. 2 plates, 2 candles, 2 glasses of red liquid that might have been wine, though no bottle was ever seen. Afterward, Lydia would read aloud from an old leather-bound book, its pages water, stained, and its words written in both English and something older, a script that curved like roots or veins. Samuel would listen, his eyes half closed, his hand resting over his chest, where a faint scar crossed from shoulder to heart. He would whisper something each time she finished reading. The same phrase, the same rhythm, as though it were a vow renewed nightly. The housekeeper, Mrs. Wren, was the only one who'd ever stepped inside since their parents died. She lasted less than a week. When she came back down the mountain, her hands were shaking too hard to hitch her horse. She told the sheriff that the 2 of them, Lydia and Samuel, slept in the same bed, that they had a nursery with 7 empty cradles and walls covered in charcoal drawings of faces with no eyes. When asked what she saw in the cellar, she refused to answer. She just said one thing before she left town forever. They're not trying to have children. They're trying to bring someone back. After that, the Oates house was left alone again. The sheriff wrote his report, then burned it. The town preacher moved away without notice. And every night, the lake seemed to draw a little closer to the house, as if listening. But there was one man who wouldn't stay quiet, Dr. Elias Granger, the physician who had once delivered Lydia and Samuel as infants. He had seen the birth himself, and what he remembered of that night was enough to haunt him through every sermon bell and storm since. He knew what those twins were, and he knew what was buried beneath that house. Dr. Elias Granger kept a locked cabinet behind his desk, a small iron box that never appeared on his inventory list when the county auditors came through. Inside it were 12 birth ledgers spanning 3 decades, but one of them, the smallest, bound in cracked black leather, bore no official seal. It had no dates, only names. And the first entry, written in a trembling hand, read, Lydia Oates, female, born still. Samuel Oates, male, breathing. Umbilical cord entwined. Do not separate. Below that, a second entry in darker ink, added later, correction. Both breathing. Granger had delivered twins before, but none like these. Their mother, Eleanor Oates, had screamed for 3 days straight, her voice carrying down the mountainside, until even the coyotes fell silent. When at last the twins came, they were slick with blood, so thick it clung to them like oil. He remembered trying to cut the cord, and failing. The blade wouldn't pass through, as though the flesh itself refused to be parted. Samuel opened his eyes first. They were grey, not the color of sky or stone, but the grey of ash, of something that had already burned. Lydia didn't cry at all. She only reached for her brother, and when Granger pulled them apart, both children began to seize until he pressed their foreheads together again. Only then did the tremors stop. Their mother died before dawn. Their father followed a week later, found hanging in the barn with a page from the family Bible nailed to his chest. The verse was from Genesis 19:30, the one most preachers skip when reading aloud. And the firstborn said unto the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. The Oates family buried them both on their land. No priest, no service, just earth and silence, and from that night forward, Dr. Granger never returned. But he couldn't forget what he'd seen, because the following spring he received a letter, unsigned, written in a spidery hand he recognized immediately. They said she was stillborn, but she is awake now, and she remembers you. Years passed. Granger tried to ignore the rumors, the unaged twins, the empty cradles, the humming in the night. But after the first malformed infant washed ashore, his guilt grew heavier than his silence. He began to write again, not reports, not letters, but warnings. He documented every strange occurrence, every stillbirth near the lake, every missing child. His final note, dated the night before he vanished, was only 7 words long. The blood remembers what the mind forgets. The next morning, his cabin was empty. His journal was found open on his desk, pages soaked in something that wasn't ink. That same week, Lydia Oates began wearing white again, and the townspeople whispered that the house by the lake was preparing for a wedding. The invitations were never sent. No one in Crater Lake received a letter, no bells rang, and yet, that summer, everyone knew the Oates twins were to be wed. Some said they saw white curtains hung in the upper windows for the first time in decades. Others swore they heard a piano playing through the fog, its notes warping like breath pressed against glass. By dusk, a pale light glowed in every window of the house, the color of candlelight seen through bone. No one dared go near, but there were witnesses all the same. The old fisherman, Calvin Hurst, told the sheriff he saw them at twilight. Samuel in a black coat, buttoned to the throat. Lydia in white lace, her face veiled and unmoving. They stood at the lake's edge with a small table between them, a book, and a bowl of something red that steamed in the cold air. Behind them, 7 empty chairs faced the water. Calvin said he heard them speak, but it wasn't English. The words bent like wind through reeds, soft but heavy, ancient. He saw Samuel cut his palm, then Lydia's, and as their blood dripped into the bowl, the lake began to ripple. Though the air was perfectly still, he watched as Lydia lifted her veil, leaned forward, and kissed her brother, slow, reverent, unafraid. Then she pressed his bloody palm against her abdomen and whispered something that sounded like, "Return." Calvin fled before the ceremony ended. When he reached town, his hair had gone white. He died 3 weeks later in his sleep, eyes still open, mouth full of lake water. The next morning, smoke rose from the Oates chimney, thick and black, for 3 days straight. When it finally cleared, Samuel was the only one seen again. He came into town wearing his wedding coat, his hands bandaged, and asked the grocer for 7 pounds of salt and a spool of thread. When asked where his sister was, he smiled, faint, hollow, and said, "She's resting." But not for long. That night, a sound echoed across the valley, half scream, half song, and the lake froze solid in a single hour, though it was midsummer. No birds sang after that. No animals drank from that water again. Inside the house, behind shuttered windows, Lydia's veil still hung from the ceiling beam, but beneath it, the floorboards moved, as though something beneath the wood was breathing. The people of Crater Lake told themselves it was a curse, a sickness, a madness of blood. But the truth was far older than any of them understood, because what Lydia had called back that night, what she and Samuel had joined, wasn't meant to live in flesh again. For months after the wedding, the Oates house stayed silent. No lamps in the windows, No footprints in the frost. Only the faint, rhythmic sound of something moving beneath the floor. Slow pulsing, like a second heartbeat buried deep in the foundation. The town pretended not to hear. The sheriff stopped his rounds near the lake. The postmaster returned their mail unopened. But the silence was not mercy, it was fear. Because in that silence, something grew. When winter came, Lydia was seen again. Only once. A hunter named Reuben Carter swore he saw her crossing the frozen lake at dawn. Her bare feet left no prints. Her belly was swollen, far too round for a woman so thin, and under her nightgown, something shifted. Not like a child moving, more like a bag of snakes rippling under skin. He called out to her, but she didn't turn. She only whispered, though the wind carried it clear. They are almost ready. By spring, the ground around the Oates property had changed. The snow melted faster there, and where the meltwater pooled, the earth began to blister, small mounds pushing up from below, as though the soil itself were trying to breathe. Dogs refused to go near. Birds that flew over were found dead days later, wings slick with a strange film. Then one night, the house lit up again. Light in every window, a hum so deep it made the air tremble. The sound was like prayer, but broken. 1,000 voices whispering the same word at once, a name no one could quite hear. When the sheriff finally gathered the courage to go, he found the door wide open. Inside, the air was hot and wet, like the inside of an animal. The table from the wedding was still there, but now 7 cradles surrounded it, each carved from the same wood, each lined with white cloth. Inside every cradle lay a shape. Not a child, not a doll, something in between. Limbs too long, eyes sealed shut with wax, and mouths that seemed to be forming even as he watched. And Lydia, she was gone. Only her dress remained, draped across a chair, soaked through with blood and lake water. Samuel was kneeling beside the cradles, whispering to them, touching each one like a priest blessing an altar. When the sheriff called his name, Samuel looked up and smiled. "They're not mine," he said. "They're hers." Then he stood, walked into the cellar, and never came back out. The sheriff sealed the house that night. By morning, the cradles were gone, every one of them. But for months after, people swore they saw small figures in the fog, crawling through the reeds by the shore, pale and silent, as if still searching for the mother who made them. And when the thaw came again, 7 small coffins washed up at once, perfectly built, perfectly sealed, floating upright like they were waiting to be found, each one empty. By the summer of 1904, the people of Crater Lake had stopped sleeping. The fog no longer came at dawn. It never left. It lingered in the streets like breath, thick and clinging, carrying the faint sound of crying that seemed to come from everywhere at once. 7 families, the same 7 who had lived there since the town's founding, began to lose their children. One by one, cribs found empty, footprints leading to the lake, and then nothing. At first they whispered that it was wolves, then that it was grief, madness, or guilt for letting the Oates family live unchecked for so long. But when little Mary Wren disappeared, the granddaughter of the housekeeper who had fled that cursed home, her father swore he saw a pale figure outside the window that night, cradling something small against its chest, singing softly in a voice that was both male and female. That was when the town decided it was time to end the Oates line, to end whatever it had become. They came in the dark, torches and kerosene in hand. No sheriff this time, no preacher either, just men with shaking hands and trembling hearts. They didn't speak as they walked the path up the hill. They didn't need to. Every man there had already heard the cries in the fog, and every one of them had lost something. When they reached the house, the door was already open. Inside, the candles were burning. On the walls, written in a dark, sticky red, was a single phrase repeated again and again: "Return what was promised." The men scattered, searching room by room, but the house was empty. Almost. In the nursery, the 7 cradles stood again, but this time they were filled with nothing but salt. And in the center of the room lay a dress, neatly folded, with a lock of golden hair tied around it. Then came the whisper, not from one place, but from everywhere. The walls seemed to breathe. The air turned heavy and hot. And from beneath the floorboards came the sound of something moving. When the first scream tore through the house, no one knew whose it was. The men dropped their torches, stumbled for the door, but the fire caught fast, faster than any wood should burn. It raced across the walls like it already knew the path. Outside, the flames climbed higher than the pines. Some swore they saw faces in the smoke, small eyeless, mouths open wide in silent wailing. The fire didn't spread to the forest. It stayed contained, as if it only wanted the house, and the things sleeping beneath it. By dawn, nothing remained but ash and stone. They found Samuel Oates's wedding band fused to a floor beam, and 7 small depressions in the suit, the size of infants' hands. The town buried what they could find in an unmarked grave by the edge of the water. They salted the earth and swore an oath that no one would build there again. But as the last shovel struck the ground, a sound rose from beneath the soil, faint, muffled, and wet. A heartbeat, slow, steady, waiting. And when the wind shifted, carrying the smell of burned wood and sweet decay, someone noticed the lake had turned red for the first time in living memory. They thought the fire had ended it. They salted the ground, burned the name from every record, and swore never to speak the word Oates again. But a thing like that, something born of blood and promise, doesn't die with fire. It only changes form. In the years that followed, Crater Lake became a ghost of itself. The mines closed. The schoolhouse rotted. Families drifted away, leaving behind empty homes and fields gone to weeds. But those who stayed began to notice small, impossible things, coincidences at first. A newborn with grey eyes, though neither parent had them. A woman humming a tune no one had taught her. The same lullaby the children once heard from the lake. A child born with a birthmark shaped like a hand pressed to its ribs. Dr. Granger's old assistant, who'd taken over the county records, began to see a pattern. Every few years, a child was born that shouldn't have been. Stillborn, yet breathing by dawn, pale, quiet, eyes that didn't quite focus. He wrote to the state authorities, but the letters were never answered. After the 3rd report, he stopped writing altogether. He'd started to hear voices in the fog. Then, in 1919, 15 years after the fire, the lake thawed early, and with the thaw came bones. 7 sets, small, perfectly arranged. Rising through the mud like the earth itself was returning what it couldn't contain. The county sent men to collect them. Each skeleton was identical, same height, same bone density, and each skull had the faint ridge of an 8th tooth forming in the jaw. Human, but not entirely. The coroner sealed the findings. He said it was easier that way, but his wife told a different story. She said he'd started waking at night, staring at their infant son, whispering, "It's them." They found another way in. Over the next decade, descendants of the old families began showing strange ailments. Infertility, fevers that came with the smell of salt, dreams of water seeping through the floorboards. Some began sleepwalking to the lake, hands outstretched, as if answering a call too deep to hear. In 1931, a census taker arrived in Crater Lake and found only 12 residents left. He noted that all of them bore some trace of resemblance. Gray eyes, identical jawlines, and unnatural pallor. He recorded them as relatives, though no one claimed kinship. When he asked their names, they all gave the same one, unearths. By the next spring, the town was gone, houses empty, doors open, no signs of struggle, just absence. And on the shore of the lake, a line of footprints leading into the water. 7 sets. The government fenced off the area that year. They called it unstable ground. No one was allowed to enter again. But in winter, when the fog drifts down through the valley, hunters say the lake still glows faintly from beneath. A pulse, slow and steady, like something alive beneath the ice. Because the oat's blood never died. It moved on, it remembered, and it waits for the rest of itself to wake. They said time would bury it, that the lake would swallow what was left, and the mountain would forget. But mountains remember, and lakes never forget what's been fed to them. 120 years later, the land that once held Crater Lake is a national reserve, closed to the public. Unstable terrain, the signs say, but every few years a hiker vanishes. Search teams always return empty-handed, except for one thing: melted glass, smooth and black, like the kind formed by fire hot enough to turn Earth into mirror. In 2021, a research team arrived to map underground heat vents. They expected volcanic activity. What they found was something else. The sensors picked up a heat signature, steady, contained exactly where the oats house once stood. Temperature 300 degrees. Depth 0. They thought it was an error. Until the drone footage came back. In the center of the forest clearing, beneath layers of ash and moss, something glowed faintly in the shape of a foundation. Rectangular. Familiar. When they enhanced the image, the corners of the structure pulsed like veins. That night, one of the researchers, Dr. Harper, began hearing whispers through her comm headset. She thought it was radio interference until the words became clear. You came back. The next morning, her tent was empty. Only her boots remained, standing upright in the frost, filled halfway with black water. The team fled. The site was shut down again. The footage was sealed. But one file leaked. A thermal scan showing a human silhouette standing in the middle of the heat signature. Its outline burned white. Around it, 7 smaller figures. The locals say if you drive near the old access road at night, you'll see a faint orange shimmer rising from the trees. Not smoke, not mist. Firelight. The kind that never moves, never fades. Sometimes, if you roll down your window, you'll hear humming. A woman's voice, distant and soft, singing to something you can't see. And if you listen closely, you'll realize it isn't coming from the forest. It's coming from beneath you, because the oats house didn't burn down. It burned inward, and the fire never died. It sank. Into the roots, into the soil, into the bloodline that still walks, unaware of what's sleeping under their skin. Every generation, one is born who hears the humming. Every generation, one walks back to the water. And when the last of them returns, the house will rise again, rebuilt in fire, brick by ash, room by bone. The twins will stand once more by the lake, hand in hand, waiting for their children to come home. And if you're ever near Crater Lake, when the fog rolls low, and you see a faint orange glow beneath the water, don't stop. Don't look, because the house is still burning, and it's looking for you next. They say the fire still burns, but it isn't the kind you can see. It's the kind that hides beneath the skin of the world, the kind that waits. When the snow melts in Crater Lake, the water runs red for a single day. Scientists blame minerals. Locals don't bother with explanations anymore. They just stay inside, bolt the doors, and whisper the same old warning. Don't answer the humming. But one woman did. In the spring of 2025, a genealogist named Evelyn Hart came to the region. She wasn't looking for folklore. She was tracing bloodlines. Her grandmother had been adopted from Oregon in 1910. With no birth record, only a name Lydia, Evelyn followed the archives, the burned registries, the censored reports, until every trail ended at one word crossed out in red oats. The deeper she dug, the stranger her dreams became. She began waking in the middle of the night with her hands covered in soil and the smell of smoke on her clothes. Her reflection started to blur. Sometimes it smiled when she didn't. She found the lake on the 5th day, fenced off, forgotten, choked by fog. But when she touched the water, it was warm, and beneath the rippling surface, something glowed. The outline of a house, perfectly preserved, windows flickering with orange light. A woman's figure moved inside, turning slowly toward her. For a moment, Evelyn swore she saw her own face staring back. That night, campers on the ridge saw fire again. A single column rising from the lake, no smoke, no heat, just light. The same kind of light that started everything. When investigators arrived, they found the fence torn open, Evelyn's camera submerged near the shore. The footage was mostly static, except the last frame. A woman in white, standing ankle, deep in water, humming softly. Behind her, 7 small figures watching. And then, a flash. The kind that looks like lightning, or the beginning of something waking. They closed the site again, forever this time. But the forest still glows at night. Sometimes, hikers claim to see the house burning beneath the water, its windows breathing, its door waiting. Because the oats fire wasn't meant to destroy, it was meant to preserve. The house didn't die. It learned how to live inside us, through names, through blood, through memory. And every few generations, it calls one home. So if you ever hear humming when there's no wind, or see a flicker of orange light where there shouldn't be any, don't look toward it. Don't say her name. Just keep walking, because the oats fire is patient. It's been waiting a long time, and tonight, it's listening.